So you want to be closed and in your corner, go ahead. But isn't life so much more joyful and enjoyable if you can actually reach out and make allies and friends of people who were brought up to believe, maybe as some of us are brought up, that the other is always going to be your enemy. And that, without a doubt in my mind, that is the reward of peacemaking, reconciliation, social justice. If you can actually go to places that you thought you could never be in.
That's Máirtín Ó Muilleoir, a bridge builder and community builder for Belfast, in the city and around the world. I'm John Lee, flying solo today as co-host Martin Nutty was in Ireland when Máirtín and I met in New York for our latest Global Irish Nation conversation here on Irish Stew.
This episode is brought to you by the American Irish Historical Society, located on Fifth Avenue in New York City. With an extensive schedule of historical and cultural events hosted in a fabulous Gilded Age mansion, the American Irish Historical Society is building connections from the past into the future. Find out more about events at the American Irish Historical Society by visiting aihsny.org. That's aihsny.org.
Well, let's start it this way. You wander down the stately halls of Belfast City Hall, the Dome of Delight, and you find the equally stately portraits of a series of somber, dignified, distinguished-looking gentlemen, Belfast Lord Mayors. All formally posed images painted in the traditional portrait mode, vertical rectangles. And then you come to a square canvas, actually tilted into a diamond shape. And against a vibrant purple background, we confront the 70th Lord Mayor of Belfast in his jogging clothes, purple t-shirt emblazoned in the Irish language. He's facing us directly, arms akimbo, smiling, welcoming, energized, and just a little bit in your face. What's this picture telling us about Máirtín Ó Muilleoir? Well, fortunately, he's sitting right across the table from me. So let's ask him, what does this picture tell us about what makes Máirtín run?
Well, first of all, thanks for that glorious introduction, John. Nice to be here in New York and speaking to the Irish Stew podcast, folks. Interestingly, that portrait in City Hall is by Ireland's greatest visual artist, Robert Balla, who isn't terribly well at the minute, but who made a huge contribution to the arts and to society in Ireland over many years. So he's the guy who said to me when I was getting my portrait made by him for the end of my year as Mayor of Belfast, I came in with my beautiful pink shirt, pink tie. And he said, do you have anything else at all you could wear? And I said, I have my running gear in the car. And then history recounts, as you recount, that he did a portrait of me with the Lord, with the T-shirt and running gear. And the T-shirt, of course, speaks for a wonderful cause, because the T-shirt is in Irish, but it supports the Northern Ireland Children's Hospice. And like you in America, we're challenged in healthcare at home. And one of the most challenging areas is palliative care, end-of-life care. And the Northern Ireland Hospice, who are in New York this week looking allies, maybe that's something we talk about later on. They do magnificent work. My father died in the hospice in 2004. So that was a little bit of payback, so it was. And it's really interesting you say it's a little bit in your face. Maybe it is. But you have to remember my first meeting in City Hall in 1987, and that portrait was 2014. In 1987, I was put out after 10 minutes for speaking in Irish. So that was a nice sort of a denouement, I suppose.
Well, it seems to be a breath of fresh air compared to a lot of those, classic oil paintings, like old master style paintings.
And isn't that what we're about, really? The work that you're about, in Irish America, the work we're about in the city of Belfast. It's a breath of fresh air, trying to move on from times when things were much narrower, much staler, even suffocating. And we don't do that alone. We do that with other positive people. People of all political views, by the way. No one has a claim to being the only authors of Belfast's change. But I always like to identify with people who push things to the bright side of the road. Just nudge things a little bit towards the bright side of the road, whether you're in New York or Belfast.
One last word on the painting, because I was an art history major, so I looked for symbolism. Mm-hmm. You're wearing 2 watches. Tell me there's some significance there.
Everybody says that, but actually one's a running watch, of course, because I was running on your beautiful East River this morning, and those of us who are mad enough still want to know how fast or how slow we ran. At my age, I'm 64, usually it's how slow I ran, but running's a big part of my life. And interestingly, and I don't want to get too anorak on you, but interestingly, after every run, I record how far I ran. So that's how nerdy I am in relation to running, but it's a great pursuit.
Excellent. Well, let's get back to the kind of discussion you were talking about there, about the aligning with people and going across into different political areas. One thing I was thinking of as I was reading about some of your stuff is, your political affiliation, it's not a monolith. Somebody would say, oh, you're a liberal Democrat, you believe such and such. I go, well, actually, that thing I'm not too sure about. I'm more in this camp. Mm-hmm. Even within our own labels, they can be limiting. And it sounds like you have been someone who's kind of set your own course, despite whatever the labels were at the time.
Well, I remember once in City Hall asking one of my colleagues in Sinn Féin, do we have an independent vote on this? And he said, no independent votes. So I always enjoyed, I served Sinn Féin 2 10-year periods. But I always believed that it's really about people, and people can have different political opinions, not least due to the background. I come from a city that was very polarised, very factionalised, very bitterly divided. So you want to find common ground, expecting people to begin from your position is fairly stupid. And what I've also believed and tried to practice is I'm not a churchgoer. I'm a great admirer of faith communities, whether they're Muslim or Hindu or Jewish or Christian, but I'm not a churchgoer, much to my mother's regret. However, I had a great friend called Father Des Wilson who lived in West Belfast, real people's priest. And he actually baptised all our 4 children in his kitchen because he was banned from saying mass in churches. So that gives you an idea of his disposition. But he once said to me, don't let a small thing like politics get in the way of a big thing like friendship. And that's a good rule of thumb for making progress. And occasionally I meet people who will bring the shutter down on me because they think they know who I am. I always think that's a very limiting way to live your life. So I hope people are as open-minded as I am. Judge people as you meet them, as they act towards you. And I'm a favour of broad alliances. Really, none of us, and this is a very polarised country as well, none of us are big enough to really deliver the changes we want, in my view, if we can't make alliances with people who don't agree with us 24/7 or don't agree with us across every issue. So.
Yeah, I've read comments you made about meeting people halfway.
Yeah.
Can you get to the halfway point and they're not there to meet you?
So here's the rub. Because I was the Lord Mayor of Belfast, which is a great privilege, greatest job in the world. But because our city was so divided, and it's a great scar on the city that we still have walls separating our working class communities. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, and it'll be a long time before they're gone, but you can still make peace in your heart, hopefully, with people. But when I had to reach out to the other side, and some of that was tough. Every time I tried to do that, I was met halfway. Every time. Not 50% of the time or 70%, but in every initiative we did, reaching out to the Protestant or Unionist people, they responded with generosity, with graciousness, with grace. I remember just a small example, but I went in a park run in a really strong Unionist orange part of Belfast. And when I finished, a guy came up to me and he said, "You come back here often. You come back here often." And that for me is where ordinary people are. If you open up a little bit, I think they will respond. So you want to be closed and in your corner, go ahead. But isn't life so much more joyful and enjoyable if you can actually reach out and make allies and friends of people who were brought up to believe, maybe as some of us are brought up, that the other is always going to be your enemy. And that, without a doubt in my mind, that is the reward of peacemaking, reconciliation, social justice. If you can actually go to places that you thought you could never be in, and without boring you unduly, and it's a story about the Hospice again, but as the Northern Ireland Hospice always invites the Lord Mayor to visit. Yeah, it's a little bit of promotion for them, and also their key place in the city is looking after, making sure people live to the end of their lives. And they asked me to visit some patients. They would go into the room first and they would ask a patient, "Do you mind if the Lord Mayor comes in?" And so they come out and said that this lady's happy for you to visit. I went into the room. Her daughter was beside the bed. The lady was sleeping. She was perhaps 85 years of age. She was like a little sparrow in the bed. She was on her last days of life. And I spoke to her daughter, and we talked about her mother. And then I left. And afterwards, I got a letter to City Hall from the daughter saying my mother passed away 2 days later. She said it was wonderful for me to think she was a strong Unionist, loyalist, Protestant lady from Sandy Row, which is really the heart of the empire at Belfast. And she said, and you were a Sinn Féin mayor, and you were able to come in and talk to us. And she said, I want to thank you for that. And I kept that letter. That was the high point of my entire period as mayor. So anyway, that's don't I get too emotional, but that's so simple. That didn't involve anything. It didn't involve any money. It didn't involve any pre-meetings. It just involved just reaching out. So anyway, so there you are.
At the human level, like a lot when you're in the class category label, there's walls. But even people who, when they're confronted with the same thing, like they might have a very strong anti-immigration feeling, but when they're encountering a person who just fell down on the road, who happened to be an immigrant, they're reaching over to help them. Yeah, so at the individual level, there's the common ground.
Well, absolutely. I've been the beneficiary of Southern hospitality in this great country many times. The great peacemaking padre from Clonard Monastery and also in West Belfast, where the peace process really started, where Gerry Adams met John Hume in the 90s to start the peace process. Father Jerry Reynolds used to say that peace starts one heart to one heart. So you might think it's a 10,000 word article, or you might think it's a great address, but he says heart to heart. And, he was an exemplary peacemaker. And I think that's true, one heart at a time.
What is, I read a story, and I'll mangle the history here because, I have a familiarity with Irish history and what goes on in Northern Ireland, but far from any kind of expertise in the area. But I was reading an article about an earlier step in the peace process that ultimately did not gel, but sort of set the stage. And they said that the two rival factors came together over the fact that they like horses. What are some of those little personal things where you've been able to you've seen people just the borders, the walls come down because there's something?
Yeah, it's interesting. They tell me when Gerry Adams met George Bush Jr., President George Bush, there was a lot of talk at that time. I think it was maybe after Iraq won, or the first war in Iraq, and a lot of tension between the position in Ireland and the American government position, as there is today, of course. And, of course, when Gerry Adams went in the White House and met George Bush Jr., they spent half an hour talking about dogs. And that's always been the way. From our perspective in Belfast, the sport of boxing has always united people. Even, it's a working class sport. It's a very, very hard way to earn a living. I see it to be more Irish boxers in the Paris Olympics 10 than ever before. So it's a thriving sport. But that's a sport that people have always made common cause on. But that doesn't mean that they had the same politics.
Right.
In fact, it doesn't even mean that some of them didn't go out and fought each other. But for that period, and this wonderful, and I really love this idea, you leave your politics at the door. And see if you can do that successfully. I think that's a building block for a more successful society. It's not a panacea, it's not kumbaya, but there are certain times when you just have to say, look, politics is important to me, but for this moment, it's going to be left at the door and we're going to stand on the common ground. So, I'm not the Dalai Lama, John, I'm as bad as anybody else, but those are real lessons of peacemaking, which are very applicable to this country at the minute, because I've never seen it as divided as it is at the minute. It's a really delicate position. So I admire anyone who can try and build some common ground, and I wouldn't give up on that. I think that's a work of ages. It's not something you try and you say, well, we'll give up on that. I think you do need common ground.
Well, I was the head of the president of the Irish Business Organization and of New York, which I know you're familiar with and you've been to and you've spoken at. And I always really appreciated the non-political aspect of it. And if I ever felt it was getting political, that would be one area I would push back on, because it allowed you to have friends from completely, you knew them as people, and just put the politics at the door. Leave that out of what you were doing in this meeting, in this setting.
Yeah, and it's important just to put on record that the knowledge that Irish America has of Irish history, of Irish dance, Irish music, Irish sports, the number of Irish American organisations right across this country, and I have the privilege to get to see these organisations and people outside of New York. It's an absolute boon and boost to Ireland, that the genius within Irish America, the depth of love, that empathy and connection, which is extraordinary, because I'm not an Irish American, so I can only try and imagine what it's like to come to Ireland for the first time and see people who look like you and go back to where your people left from. That's an experience that I can't have. But we're really fortunate that there are so many organisations here which put I was going to say put Ireland first, but maybe that's maybe a term we won't use, but have a place in their heart for Ireland and have a reverence for Ireland and a high regard. And what I have found is that once I say I'm coming from Ireland, that doors will open in this country. It doesn't mean you'll get everything you want, but it does mean that calls will be taken. And in this city in New York, there's no call that will come from the Consulate General of Ireland on Park Avenue which will not be answered by anyone who's Irish American, and that's a tribute to Irish America, that they're really willing to go that extra mile all the time to promote Ireland, and the rider to that, or the corollary to that, is that we have to promote Irish America as well. And sometimes it's not a two-way street. I meet people in Ireland who benefit from Irish America, who leverage Irish America, but they don't respect Irish America. They might even have a disrespect for Irish America. And I think that's an ignorance on the part of those people in Ireland. They don't really understand. If you go to Notre Dame, if you go to Iona University up in New Rochelle, if you go to Fordham, you'll see in all these places there are oases of learning about Ireland, but they're also sanctuaries for Irish writers, Irish artists, from Heaney to Dean to Paul Muldoon, all these universities and other colleges. So I'm really major on respect for Irish America. Do you have to love every Irish American? No, you don't. You have to agree with every Irish American? No, you don't. But you should respect Irish America, where it's come from, what it's doing and what it's trying to do.
Yeah, people ask me who you are, and I describe you as a bridge builder.
That's nice.
And I describe you, and let's see how you feel about this one, the man who put Belfast on the map in New York, because on the mental map of Irish America, because before I picked up on your energy, Belfast meant images of the tanks and soldiers and smoke and things you would rather not pursue. And I know the city changed, but you brought that message to the U.S. in a way I don't think anybody else has. And you build a lot of bridges, and the longest one is the bridges that are built now between Belfast and New York. In particular, that's why you're here this weekend. Tell us about, did I overstate your case? And tell us about New York, New Belfast coming up in just a couple of days.
Well, you very generously overstated it, but keep going, keep going. I mean, Belfast sold itself once we had this miraculous peace process, and I was someone who believed there would never be an end to the warfare. Never. And I saw really just blackness, just darkness, just no light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm deeply grateful for that. But then, and when I look around the world, how many conflicts there are, how unusual it is to have a successful peace process. And of course, we wouldn't have that peace process without Irish America, without Irish American pressure, Irish American influence, without the influence of Bill Clinton and George Mitchell. So I think it's been to the benefit of the Irish Echo newspaper, which I've been publishing since 2007. It's been to the benefit of the networks that I have in Belfast, and to the institutions of Belfast, whether they be accelerators, whether tech accelerators, whether they be companies, whether they be charities who are looking support in Irish America. So it's been a labour of love, if you wish. But I think you do overstate it. But what we've managed to do in the last 15 years is we have said, you can't think of Ireland without thinking of Belfast.
Right.
And you're a Belfast ambassador. You've been to the homecoming. Absolutely. And increasingly I see that people saying, well, you went to holidays for Ireland, you didn't go to Belfast. You're really missing out. So this Thursday in Manhattan, we'll have our 15th annual New York, New Belfast Conference luncheon. We've had to iterate a little bit post-COVID, but we'll bring together not only the Northern Irish diaspora, but the Irish diaspora in the Big Apple, plus the many friends of Belfast. We always bring out a top-class delegation from Belfast. I'm delighted. We have the Lord Mayor, the new Lord Mayor of Belfast, who was appointed last night. He's travelling over he's over Iceland as we speak, with the chief executive of the council, with a strong delegation from the city to send out the message that, look, we're not a second-class city. The number one city in Ireland's Belfast. And I tell my Dublin friends this all the time. The most exciting city in Ireland is Belfast. It is the capital of Northern Ireland for sure, but it's a city with such a great heritage, great people, wonderful people. And this New York, New Belfast conference, with its walking tour afterwards, with its finale and the wonderful Dead Rabbit, another product of Belfast, it helps to forge those friendships and partnerships, and hopefully community, culture, commerce, that all three of those aspects benefit going forward from that small initiative. So,
well, I have had the privilege of visiting Belfast a couple of times. I did receive the great medallion of honor for being a Belfast ambassador. I went to a pub afterwards thinking it would buy me pints for the rest of the night, which did not happen. So perhaps the value has increased in the meantime. In visiting Belfast, there's a kind of tension in the air that is also, it's dynamic. You feel something's happening in Belfast that I've never felt happening in any other city that I've visited.
Well, we call that electricity in the air, and I think that is right. There's an energy. It's a work in progress. There are real problems. I've just walked past, the Roosevelt Hotel here in New York. You have your own problems in this city.
That's where a lot of the migrants now are. Midtown Hotel, a lot of migrants stationed there. So every great city has, problems which are not insurmountable, but which are challenges, which need focus, which need a unified approach, which need a city to work with one voice. So Belfast is no exception to that. Our problems are deep rooted. We had 3,000 people, 3,500 people killed over 25, 30 years. You don't just brush that onto the carpet and say, okay, that's the past. There is a legacy. There's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of wounds. We have really poor mental well-being statistics. We have a youth suicide problem. But what you do have, and this is like New York,
you have a lot of people who care about the city. Too many people care about New York to allow it to go backwards. And it's the same with Belfast. But boy, is it a challenge? Absolutely it is. And is the peace process something you can say, done and dusted, put a little bow around it, finished? No, it requires the work of many people.
And it's been threatened on many occasions.
It has. And, you know, I always have the feeling I have is that, you know, you fight to defend the peace. It's like a bicycle. It has to keep moving forward, have to keep making progress. And I think we've made that progress when I see companies like Citigroup in Belfast, Allstate of Chicago in Belfast, Liberty of Boston in Belfast. I think we can only be positive for the future. The young people don't have the baggage I have. So when I grew up, really, there were really gun battles, and I'm not exaggerating. There were gun battles on the street every day. My mother's best friend was killed on Holy Thursday, 1972, when I was 12. And that really was a searing memory in a gun battle and a crossfire from my youth. So we grew up in an abnormal time, and turning abnormality to normality is the work of many hands. However, I think we're every day you move forward makes it more impossible to go back to the violence of the past. You're embedding the peace, you're embedding reconciliation. And then, of course, justice is so important. Ordinary people are entitled to housing, to the opportunity of employment, the dignity of employment, treated with respect. And respect is such a huge word in this country and in my country. And then you need to really have a proposition which is compelling. And extraordinarily, out of Brexit, we have ended up with this unique economic zone in Northern Ireland. We're the only region in all of Europe which can trade seamlessly with Great Britain and with the EU. So if you're manufacturing green batteries, for example, you can access the 450 million people in the EU and access the 60 million in Great Britain. And when you ally that with the strong universities, with the young population, we have that now a proposition we never had before. And we need, in my view, and this is one of the reasons why I come here so often, not just because it's so much fun, we need to sell. You need to sell the city. Nothing sells itself, John. That's why you're in employment, because people need communications wizards to sell things. And I really enjoy seeing the ministers from the Northern Executive. I enjoy seeing them in America, because you've got to tell people. You've got to tell people that you're having success, and you have to ask them to partner you.
And you say there's an open door in New York, but you got to keep knocking on that door every once in a while, or they forget you. So you have to come over. Let's sell Belfast. Let's sell Belfast on two things. First of all, as a business proposition, you mentioned some of the advantages. What else would draw a business to Belfast?
Well, with 30,000 students in two great universities, Ulster University and Queen's University, centres of excellence, world-class centres of excellence in cancer research and fintech and cybersecurity. Then we have smaller universities as well, which have a great reputation for holding summer schools related to peace building. We have the Mitchell Institute in Queen's, which is really leveraging the experience we have had of creating peace in a troubled world and inviting experts and students from all around the world to learn about that peace process, to take other examples of peace building, but also focus on human rights. You know, what are the foundations for peacemaking? It is, after Dublin and Lyon, it's the third youngest city in Europe. And the great thing about the kids, including my own kids, is that they really are very positive. They are focused on the future. Education has always been a big deal. You know, I come from a very working class background. We lived in a council, social housing. There was 7 of children, 2 adults, 9 people in a 3-bedroom house is a big number. But we always focused on education, and we've been very fortunate in Belfast that although all education is free, so there are no private schools in Belfast, that there's a very, very high standard. We have these dedicated teachers, I'm sure you do have here as well, who really realise they want to change a child's life, you really want to empower a child, then educate that child. So we have a great standard of life. We have a beautiful city and a beautiful setting. I don't even compare the rents in Belfast to the rents in New York. But also for some of the American companies, it's equidistant. between the operations they have in India, for example, and the operations in America. And that's one of the reasons we got so many of those great companies. So for me, it's a very authentic city. It's a city where people are welcome with open arms. Because it's small, about 350,000, I find that people who come to make a living there, invest there, they have ready access not only to Belfast City Council, the leadership there, but also to the government, to the Stormont executive, to the Northern Irish leaders as well. And then we have I think we have a wonderful cultural offering. There's a wonderful new festival called Trad Fest, where they have an Irish ceilidh dancing, traditional Irish dancing, step dancing, on the slipway where the Titanic was built. And that's an example of so many different people. And people look at these projects like in East Belfast, strong pro-British Unionist area. There's a project called Skeanos. It's a Methodist church project, again, a great church of street preachers. And they have more Irish classes there than anywhere else in Belfast. And people sometimes say, oh, that's an Irish language project, but it's not, it's a peace project. Or you look at Docs Ireland, Belfast Film Festival, which is happening now. Those aren't film festivals, those are peace projects. So that for me is, without being too dramatic, everything we're involved in, which is building the city, is a project of life or death, because we have to make sure that we move forward. And that's how I regard stuff, everything I'm involved in. It's really about building the peace, and therefore it is about life or death. So the most successful of the cross-border bodies set up under the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 of the Peace Accords was Tourism Ireland, is Tourism Ireland. Very focused, very dedicated. They want to bring tourists in. They want to make sure we have a product which delivers for them. They've come up with some wonderful ideas like the Wild Atlantic Way. And increasingly, as the product has improved north of the border, they've done an absolutely standout and stand-up job in promoting the entire island. So, and it's a baby of the peace process. So what I would love to see, John, is if we could get one inward investment agency for the island. And funny, they say that in the last 48 hours of negotiating the peace deal, they were working out which bodies would be cross-border. And thrown into the mix was a cross-border inward investment body. And then it was dismissed. We didn't get it through, unfortunately. But now, because of the Brexit deal, Northern Ireland is out of the EU in terms of politics, in terms of the constitution, because the UK left. However, in terms of the economy, we're still in the single market. We're still in the EU customs union. So the island of Ireland is one economic unit. And it would be a wonderful time if our friends in Invest Northern Ireland, who do a magnificent job in bringing in some of the companies I mentioned earlier, if they and the IDA, which is, it's probably the champion inward investment agency in the world, if they were able to unite and market the island with all its different talents, to companies from around the world. So you might say, look, in Belfast, we have the biggest manufacturing business in all of Ireland and the whole island. It's Spirit Aerosystems of Wichita, Kansas, has 4,000 people making aircraft wings for Boeing. So that's the old Belfast industrial heritage still alive there. And so if you had both agencies marketing the benefits of different regions within the island, and I think that'll come. We now have in the Stormont executive, we have a minister who's very focused on an all-island economy, and it's happening of its own volition. It's no longer seen as a political option or a politically driven desire. So that's hopefully something that we'll see. Brexit was a great disappointment, John. I lost my full EU citizenship, which meant an awful lot to me. I'm still an Irish citizen, of course, of my Irish passport, but being part of the EU was a big part of our life, and the EU was a great support of the peace process. So heartbroken when we were forced out of the EU, but the consolation prize is that we have this one foot still in the EU as an economic entity, and I'm confident, John, we will rejoin the EU at some point.
Well, let's keep talking hopeful here and spread it out from Belfast to Northern Ireland. There's some new leadership in Northern Ireland that's been attracting attention to women who come from very different sides of the equation, have been making some, to my mind, unusual and hopeful cooperation, maybe symbolic, but what's your read?
Well, I think they're both very capable ladies, top-class politicians, top-class political operators. Michelle O'Neill of Sinn Féin, First Minister, Emma Little-Pengelly, Deputy First Minister, DUP. Both their fathers have been in jail for different causes, of course. And they need support. So anyone who wants to be a spectator in this and wait until they fall, well, you can do that if you want, but I don't think this is a time for sitting on the fence. This is a time for every Irish organisation across America to say, we want to do our little bit to make sure that they support what they're trying to do in the north of Ireland, that make sure that they have an opportunity to invite out representatives of the government, that they do that. This is a difficult thing to do. Now, that said, I think both big parties have learned that collapsing the government, which is always an option, was not to their benefit. It was definitely not to the benefit of society. So I think the government won't collapse again. But let me just tell you why this is the work of everybody. So I was a minister in 2016 when the government collapsed for absolutely understandable and unavoidable reasons. So the government collapsed. We were without government for 3 years. The government came back because a lady called Pat Cullen, who led the nurses, she said, we're going on strike for the first time in our history. The first time in the history of the Royal College of Nursing, they went on strike in Northern Ireland in December 2019. It became impossible for the political parties to say in the face of that strike that they wouldn't go back to government. Now, that's my read. Not everybody thanks me for having that read, but they forced the nurses, by going on strike for the first time ever, said health is a priority. We are weaker without a government, and the government went back. The government collapsed again. This time the DUP collapsed the government. Sinn Féin and the Irish national side collapsed it the first time, and DUP and the pro-British Unionists collapsed it the second time. And the DUP went back to government when, in December of 2023, is that recent, John? Was that recent, or have we had a government longer than that? I think December 23. All the unions, all the public service unions, the teachers, the bus workers, the civil servants, the nurses, everyone, the health workers, everyone went to strike together for better paying conditions, but also saying, get the bloody government back. And the government came back. So anyone who thinks that, public opinion doesn't matter, in my view, the ordinary people forced the politicians, and I say that as someone who was in politics, so politicians don't often admit this, but ordinary people forced the government to step up and come back. So I use that analogy, or I use that example to say to everyone, don't stand back. Lend your support to the progress. Keep pushing things to the bright side of the road.
Throughout your career, particularly let's look at your role as the Lord Mayor. It's a soft power kind of position. You don't really have your fingers on the levers of power, but you have the opportunity to do things that are symbolic, and so symbols can have a lot of power. What are some of the examples of a symbol that really resonated, either for you or that you've seen play out? So
let me just give you a different interpretation of that. I think the Buddhists talk about, trying to get to nothing, and of course in nothing there's everything. So when people say to me, you've no power, that means you've all power. So you can do whatever the hell you want, because my budget for the entire year was $50,000. I had no staff that I appointed. I had a small team. But you could do whatever you wanted. And that my view was that you just grabbed the city by the scruff and you said, this is what we want to do. And you it's more than a bully pulpit, but you just lead positively on the big issues of the day, which are reconciliation, which are peace building, promoting the city. So I looked at it slightly different. When people said you had no power, I said I had all power. I would do whatever I wanted. So that for me was a good learning point. But as a little aside, how difficult things were in Belfast, very challenging. So when I went into my first day in the city, I took over from a wonderful DUP Lord Mayor called Gavin Robinson. And Gavin, of course, had a picture of the Queen. He had a picture of the Queen Mother. He had a picture of the late King. And I said, well, I can't have all these things here. So we took down some. We left up a picture of the Queen. And then we brought in the 1916 proclamation, a picture of President Higgins, maybe President McAleese back then. But Gavin said to me, well, look, there's one other issue. He said, when I took over the office, there was a huge Union Jack, a huge British Union flag, which had been left here to be put on display. But he said, I thought it was a little bit over the top, that people would be coming in from all parts of the city, and the first thing you see is a really outsized Union flag. And I said, that's great, you got rid of it. He said, well, I couldn't really do that with my politics. He said, but I put it behind the wardrobe in the Lord Mayor's parlour. And he said, so it's not your problem. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. That's a great example of a good diplomat. And so I went to the Deputy Lord Mayor, who's from the DUP, and I said, God rest him, Christopher Stalford, who's since passed. And I said, Christopher, to start your year as Deputy Lord Mayor, I have a great present for you. And he said, what is it? I said, I have one of the biggest Union Jacks you've ever seen. And he was delighted. And the Deputy Lord Mayor's a really small little cupboard of an office, so he has. So he got the flag. So anyway, that's an example of, I think, how you defuse and use a little bit of diplomacy to get around problems. But so gestures are so important. So one of the things that's difficult for people in this country to understand is Irish nationalists from Belfast or from the north of Ireland or from Ireland, we don't celebrate the World War I and World War II, our British wars, in the same way they do in Birmingham or London or Bristol. So we do have a Remembrance Day, the 11th of the 11th, as they do in America. But traditionally, nationalists from my camp would never have gone to any of those things because we had British soldiers on the street, so we had a different relationship to British soldiers. But on my year in office, I really wanted to do something about that because the vast majority of people who remember the fallen, especially the First World War, they do it out of respect, of reverence, and the not only Irish people, but the Protestants of Belfast, in particular, at the Somme in 1916, over a battle over a few fields, lost over 10,000 soldiers. So I said, well, look, let me see, can I attend an event for the first time ever as a Sinn Féin Lord Mayor? And I met the Royal British Legion, and they organise the November 11th Remembrance Day activity. And they also steward it, and they do the ceremony. And I said, well, I'd like to do this. It's never been done before, but I'll stand for a minute's silence. But can you make it as painless as possible? Let's not make it a humiliation. Also, let's not make it, those guys back down. Let's make it as a respect for all those who died in the First World War. So they came to me, great man called Mervyn Elder, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Territorial Army, the Reserves. And he said, look, we're going to get this done. This is how we're going to do it. These are the optics. You'll walk out, you'll stand. And he said, and here's the statement that is read before the event. And the statement had a lot of references to Afghanistan, to Iraq. And these were understandable for British soldiers, And I said, can't do that. I said, it's too raw, it's too close. So, you're, and with all due respect, people are dead. So I would never disrespect the dead. But still, you would be asking me to stand for the soldiers who raided my home, who arrested my brother, who shot my friends. I said, that's a step too far for me. And he went away and he came back. He said, we've spoken to our headquarters in London. We're going to remove those sentences. He said, there's only 2 sentences. And he said, no one would ever know anyway.
Right.
And until this podcast, no one's known that. So we did the statement. It was about the First World War and respect for dead and so on. And we took out those two lines, which were read in Cardiff, which were read in Edinburgh, Scotland, Cardiff and Wales were read in London. And I managed to cross that particular Rubicon. And it's never gone back. Every year since then, Sinn Féin have been represented at the Remembrance Day ceremonies. And each year, in fact, they've gone farther. So recently, Michelle O'Neill, who I respect enormously, who's the Sinn Féin leader in the North, who's the First Minister, she stood for the British national anthem at a soccer game in what they call the National Stadium. And I thought that was absolutely appropriate, and I thought fair play here. Not easy. Not easy. I find that very difficult to understand for the British national anthem. But it was a great piece of bridge building and a great piece of leadership. And the late great Martin McGuinness, when asked at a conference in Finland by people from all around the world about peacemaking, said, "What's the ingredient? What's the most important ingredient?" And he wrote on the blackboard, leadership. So I really admire Emma Little-Pengelly and Michelle O'Neill for showing leadership at this critical time.
Yeah, going back to the Battle of the Somme, when we visited, my wife and daughter visited, you were the Lord Mayor at that time. We had a brief visit. We came in directly from the airport and we're jet lagged and we're not quite settled and couldn't get into our hotel yet. So we just started wandering around. We found ourselves in front of City Hall and there was a major Battle of the Somme remembrance going on. And it was quite we were in sort of a British environment there. There was the Union Jack everywhere. It was quite a striking thing to run into as our first sight in Belfast. But it was their centenary in a way. It seemed that way.
Yeah, and if you want to understand the Unionists of Ireland, of Northern Ireland, who really desperately want to be connected to London, even though London treats them with utter disdain and disrespect and ignores them and stabs them in the back as they did over Brexit, because we now have a border in the Irish Sea, which the British said they wouldn't put there. So Unionists often feel very abandoned. And one of the things they fall back on is the British military, and they have a great tradition of serving the British military. No one can gainsay that. So that we have to find a way to accommodate that, respect that, at least to understand it. And then, of course, they have their orange bands and orange marches. And some of that, for me, is so difficult. But that's the culture of Orangeism. And we're going to have to find a way on the island to accommodate that, because, I have no doubt there's change coming on the island. Will it be 10, 15, 20, 25 years? I don't know. But we're going to have to find a way to accommodate people whose future was in a united Ireland before partition, under Britain, of course, but who bring to the island of Ireland such great strength and power and tradition and genius. We are the Protestants of Ireland, the Unionists of Ireland, and that's there's aspects of that yet that we have been afraid to tackle, like issues around how do we respect their Orange tradition, how do we respect their love and admiration and deep connection to the British government. And it'd be nice not to have those problems, to say, no, we're just going to wave a magic wand and everyone's going to turn into one type of Irish nationalist, but it's going to have to be a very different situation. So that's how I view those commemorations. And the big lesson for us from City Hall is it started to change, John, and it changed over maybe 20 years. There's now only 22 Unionists in Belfast out of 60. The learning point for, I think, all of us was that you're going to have to accommodate people who are in a minority, or else you're going to end up with an alienated, estranged rump of society which wants nothing to do with the future. And we have that problem in some ways, but we're going to have to work like hell to make sure it doesn't hold any of us back. That there have to be benefits in the change for everyone. And there are some unionists who believe, no, that there haven't been benefit in the changes they've seen in recent years.
Yeah, you mentioned the idea of meeting halfway and going back maybe to the time of the Troubles. And you talked about Unionists being focused towards London, but also towards the culture, the Beatles, the music, the life, the vitality. Now has the Republic kind of moved to meet the North halfway in terms of it's not the same Republic that the Unionists would have been so vehemently opposed to. It's not the Catholic Church dominance. There's other aspects that seem to be coming together. Is the Republic becoming a more desirable partner, if I'm saying it right?
Well, there's an interesting element to this, because one of the founders of Ian Paisley's Free Presbyterian Church and then the Democratic Unionist Party said recently that he thought the best opportunity for the type of evangelical Christianity they represent was on the island of Ireland. He also believed that, Irish unity would come and that they had a better chance of maintaining and retaining their faith-based, it's a very strong evangelical Christian faith-based community was on the island of Ireland. I think we're really only starting. I think we need to do more. I think we need we need to engage people, and there is a problem because some within unionism don't want to engage. They're getting smaller and weaker, but they still want to cling on to the past, and there is no future in the past. We've tried that. We've tried that for a long time in Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland is increasingly diverse. It is it's a multicultural. It is exposed to cultures all around the world. I think if 17% of the people in the Republic of Ireland were not born on the island of Ireland, according to the last census, but economically, we're being left behind in the north, So I have to temper some of the stuff I said earlier with we do need a lot more investment. In 1921, when Ireland was partitioned, 80%, I have trouble saying the American 8, but 80% of the economic production on the island of Ireland was in the 6 counties of what became Northern Ireland. Today, it's 8%. Now, the Republic of Ireland economy, as you know, is off the charts. But you see it in everywhere. You see it in the infrastructure. You see it in the roads. You see it in the education. You see it in the buildings in Dublin and so on. You see it in the art centres. So we're going to play catch up. But I do think that if unity benefits people's pocketbook, then I think you'll see a willingness to move. But we just need to make sure we take as many people with us as possible.
Martin, as we head towards the close here, let's just take you back to the U.S. for a while. You have the York New Belfast Conference. You have an event in Boston. You forged some great ties in Buffalo, and you were just out in the Silicon Valley. Give us a little more flavor for the kind of discoveries you're making and the kind of links you're forging.
Well, everything we do has to be about boosting Belfast. With my dear friend and business colleague Conlon McCann, who you know well, we run an events company called Icing Events, but we don't do bar mitzvahs. We don't do your wedding if you're getting married again, John. Just letting you know. we do events which make a difference in Belfast, and we bring out the best of Belfast. But what I've found very exciting is that when you go to places which are maybe not as well travelled by Irish emissaries, like Silicon Valley, like Buffalo, New York, which is, of course, the capital of Irish America in deference to Congressman Kennedy, or Birmingham, Alabama, where we'll hold the Irish Roundtable in the Magic City on October 9th and 10th. When you go off the beaten path, the Irish that are in those places are even more enthusiastic, even more welcoming, and they want to make a difference. So for me, this is such a magnificent country. With all its problems, such a magnificent country. And Irish America within it is such a great treasure and asset. You get that word asset, just a great treasure and a great bedrock for all of us who come out from Ireland. And I'm keen that we engage with as many communities across the nation as possible. And we will make Boston, New York, Silicon Valley a regular, but I'd like to go into the southern states as well. I'd like really to understand them better, to look at the Scots-Irish experience. And we're going to start that in Birmingham, which of course is the capital of the Black Civil Rights Movement. So that has to be exciting for us. So at some stage we may stop this bridge building, but for now there's so much still to explore in this country, and we've such a great story to tell. I want to get out there and tell it. And the greatest ambassador for Belfast is Frederick Douglass, who said when he left in 1845, he spent 6 months there in 1845, he said that when he was presented with a Bible on his last day, he said, no matter where I go in the world, I'll always know that I have a friend in Belfast. And that's my message to everybody in Irish America. In fact, everybody in America, they'll always have a friend in Belfast.
Well, our friend in Belfast here, Máirtín, you've given us a lot of your valuable time and energy and a little bit of jet lag kicking in, I think.
Not at all.
And look forward to seeing you in a couple of days at the New York New Belfast. Let's give you a chance to make your shameless plug.
Well, first of all, thank you for being an honorary chair of New York New Belfast annual conference, and thanks for your support. I mean, my shameless plug is for the Northern Ireland Hospice, who are in New York this week, who are trying to build two alliances, one with wealthy Irish Americans, that's me and you both out, John, wealthy Irish Americans who maybe want to help the work of the hospice, which is absolutely, it is a common ground. They don't ask what colour you are, what religion you are, but they make sure that you live your life right up until your moment of death, and it's a great, great charity. But also they want to build alliances with the hospice movement in America. And there is an expertise. They say the hospice tradition in Ireland goes back 1,500 years. So it's something that's embedded in society. So there's an expertise there in the Northern Ireland Hospice and Northern Ireland Children's Hospice in Belfast, which I think can be a benefit. So it can be a partnership and an exchange. So that's my shameless plug. Look out for them when you come to Belfast. Find out more about the work of the Northern Ireland Hospice. When of course, I'm now going over time. But one of the greatest moments of my life was when my father died in the hospice, and the family was gathered, and the hospice people came in when he was confirmed dead, and he died on the 11th of November, of course, Remembrance Day. And the hospice people came in, and they knew he was a Catholic, and they lit 2 candles. They put up a little cross and maybe a little picture of the Virgin Mary, and then they left us. And I thought to myself, what an example of grace, of generosity, of respect, of dignity. So I have a personal debt, 20-year debt with the hospice, but it is a great charity.
Well, Máirtín, we'll leave websites and other information on the hospice in our show notes. I want to thank you because, you brought me into the fold, and you raised my profile as a result of my involvement with your events. And somehow I ended up with a beautiful silver medallion, making me a Belfast ambassador. So you've elevated a lot of people along the way and got them very fired up and interested in the work you're doing. So Martin Nutty is going to be very upset he missed this one. He's in Ireland right now, so that's a good excuse, but it's been a pleasure to have you here, and look forward for future conversations.
Thank you. Great opportunity to be here, and I wish everybody at the Irish Stew podcast well.
Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.